Well, greetings and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is episode 36 of Karl's Spirits. And tonight we're going to be looking at Old Grandad Bottled in Bond. Old Grandad Bottled in Bond. This is a product of BiB Suntory, a parent company of Jim Beam, of course. And originally it began production back in the 1800s, about 1840 actually, by a gentleman by the name of Raymond B. Hayden. And he named it, you guessed it, after his grandfather, Mr. Hayden. The older Hayden was an early Kentucky pioneer and, of course, a distiller. And Old Grandad began production in 1840 and has been in production ever since. One of the longest continuing production runs in bourbon history. Now, it has been owned by a number of different companies, including the Wathen family, National Distillers Group. And it was under the National Distillers Group that it was continually produced during Prohibition as a medicinal spirit. And it was specifically aimed for people with eye and ear problems. So I found that kind of interesting. So under the NDG label, Old Grandad was prescribed for people with eye and ear problems during Prohibition. So kind of interesting. In 1987, NDG dissolved, and the brand was purchased by Fortune Brands, which became the basis of the BiB Suntory group that we know today. They still produce three expressions of this. They produce an 80 proof. They produce a 100 proof bottled in bond, which is what we will be looking at this evening, and a 114 barrel proof. Interestingly, there's a couple of really kind of cool facts about this bourbon, two that I find interesting. Another bourbon has also been named after Mr. Hayden, Basil Hayden. Basil Hayden was the grandfather of, you guessed it, Raymond Hayden. And so there's actually two bourbons named after this gentleman. There's the Old Grandad, and there is Basil Hayden. So that's kind of interesting. Now, the other cool thing about this is that Basil is also owned by Jim Beam, by BiB Suntory. In fact, the two bottles are identical. You can see they are the exact same bottle. They have the exact same mash bill. They are both owned by Beam. The only difference is this is an 80 proof, about a 6-year bourbon, and aged at 6 years, while the Old Grandad is 100 proof and aged for 4 years. So it's kind of interesting to compare these two bourbons. In fact, you can tell the color is almost identical. They're the same juice, ladies and gentlemen. It's the exact same juice. Aged longer, proofed higher. It's the only difference. So it'd make it interesting side by side. The other cool thing is that Old Grandad has appeared in some very famous literature over the years. Ian Fleming once wrote that his main protagonist in his novels, his favorite bourbon at the end of a long day serving Queen and country was Old Grandad. So if it's good enough for James Bond, ladies and gentlemen, well, it's good enough for the rest of us too, probably. So let's go ahead and get to the tasting of Old Grandad Bottled in Bond. It is the standard Jim Beam mash bill, 63% corn, 27% rye, 10% malted barley. I said standard, that's the standard for this line. It is aged 4 years, and it is 100 proof, as required by the Bottle and Bond Act of 1897. In the glass, it's a nice dark honey color, a nice dark honey blonde, and just this shade of amber. Very nice. It's got great legs, really stick to the glass very nicely. The nose, I get a lot of earth tones here. And I don't mean dirt. I mean more of woodsy smell. Not wood, sawn wood, but woodsy in the woods. Maybe a damp, woodsy smell. There's a little bit of hay here, too. But there's also some really cool sweet notes that are underneath that earthy tone. Vanilla, butterscotch, green corn. So it's a little grain forward. And there's a big sweet dose of cinnamon in there as well. That was a lot of green corn on that one. So on the taste, it has a very pronounced buttery mouthfeel. It's very viscous and just coats the inside of your mouth. It leaves with a hint of alcohol. That's at 100 proof, but that quickly dissipates. There's a little burn here. It's a high rye, guys, 27%. So there is some spice here. But more importantly to me, it has some really dark flavor notes. It has notes of tobacco and dark chocolate and some oaky flavors. That caramel and vanilla definitely pop up, especially the caramel. Boy, that's creamy though. Very buttery. Also, a lot of cinnamon on the flavor tones as well. Finish. It's a warm pour. It really is. 100% or 100 proof and 27% rye. It's got a bite, but it's very comforting. It is very warm in the throat and the upper chest. So you got a really nice little Kentucky hug here. I also think this is pretty sweet on the finish. It's not dry. It's more on the sweeter tones. And you're getting more hints of that young corn and the cinnamons and the caramels. So that really follows through on this particular pour. That's just really good. So my takeaway, this is a good sipping bourbon. I think a lot of people overlook Old Grandad. They see it as a bottom shelf product. Mainly because of its price and its lack of advertising. It gets no press from Jim Beam whatsoever. I would, however, challenge anyone who thinks Basil Hayden is a great bourbon, and it's good bourbon, to do a blind tasting side by side of these two. And I would wager that 8 out of 10 people are going to come out picking Old Grandad as the superior product. I think it's higher proof. And the depth of flavor here is just really pretty spectacular. And another thing that's really spectacular about this bourbon is its price. Basil Hayden, $40. Old Grandad, $20. That's right, $20 bourbon, ladies and gentlemen. So again, that's why a lot of people see this as more of a bottom shelf bracket bourbon than anything else. It's low price. It's a really good bourbon for a really great quality. So, Karl stars on Old Grandad Bottled in Bond. We are going to go with 4.25 stars. And I think that's a little higher than what I gave Basil Hayden previously. I just think for the price, the quality of this bourbon is, it far surpasses a Basil Hayden. So, ladies and gentlemen, Old Grandad Bottled in Bond. It's a very good bourbon for a very great price. It's got some great flavors. It's very sweet with some dark tones to it. It's got a great Kentucky hug. Ladies and gentlemen, that's my take on Old Grandad. Hope you enjoy yourselves. And as always, peace and happy pours.